Well, it's really great. Oh, gotta turn my mic on. It's really great that we study the Bible. We certainly want to encourage everybody to do so. But we need to put what we're learning into practice because we can do all the learning in the world, but if we're not using it in a practical vein, then it's not as helpful. And this is what Jesus was doing when he gave the Sermon on the Mount. He was giving practical advice to people on how to live their faith. And I think as Doc was saying earlier, things are going to get darker and darker. We know that. And that's where we need to be more and more in a ministry mode because we can need to reach out to others as they're going through these things. So last time, which seems like a long time ago, we covered anger and lust as he was speaking and clarifying what the law had to say on these issues. So today we're going to cover a number of them, and I hope I can get through them all today, and then we're going to move on to something different next time. But the first one we want to talk about today is divorce. And that's in Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 through 32. It has been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causes her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her that is divorced commits adultery as well. So what is Jesus referring to? Well, back in that day, they were divorcing their mates for very frivolous reasons. If the wife burnt the husband's toast, he could divorce her. I mean, it was about how frivolous it was getting. And then they would go on to marry somebody else. And I don't know if that kind of sounds like our society today. And Jesus was saying that it not ought to be that way, that what God has put together, let not man put asunder. But he did give them the one cause, which was for committing adultery. And that was because the most sacred vow that we can make, other than our relationship to God, is to our spouse. When we get married, we vow to honor that marriage and that person. And then when somebody commits adultery, they're bringing somebody else into that equation, and that just makes it an unholy situation. So they gave people that option that they could divorce under those circumstances. Now, they didn't have to, but if the situation was deeming such, they would be justified, according to Jesus, to do so. What was happening in those days, too, is when a couple would get married, many people in the community would come to witness that marriage. And as they witnessed that marriage, they were making a commitment to hold that couple to account for the vows that they were making. So the men of the community, if the man was not behaving himself, would get together and encourage him to honor his vow. If the bride was in that situation, then the ladies would get together and encourage the bride to honor her situation. Today we don't have that. Many weddings today are basically a sideshow, and people come and they don't understand the responsibility that they have because they are witnessers of that occasion. And because people are spread apart and there's great distances and there's no longer that sense of community, the situation has kind of deteriorated. So people can think they can do whatever they want and they're not going to be held to account for it. So I feel that what Jesus is basically saying is that if a person is not going to honor their vow, that doesn't hold the other person necessarily into that situation. Particularly when there's abuse involved, there could actually be a threat to their life, to their children. When there's a severe addiction involved that's putting the family in jeopardy. These were things that the community used to deal with years ago that it's not being dealt with today. So under those circumstances, it would be all right for that person to separate out of that situation so that they and their children are not in harm's way. Now, it doesn't mean it automatically has to go to divorce, but it means that they need to be able to take care of themselves and not be in a hazardous situation. And hopefully, over time, a reconciliation can be done. If the partner is involved in addiction, hopefully they can get counseling and work their way out of it. Divorce should be an absolute last resort and not the first resort. And it should be for a very good reason, not just because you don't like them anymore. So that's what Jesus was saying about it. Now, Ellen White had some comments on that as well. Ellen White speaks of divorce in this manner. Among the Jews, a man was permitted to put away his wife for the most trivial offenses. Like every other one of God's good gifts entrusted to the keeping of humanity, marriage has been perverted by sin, but is the purpose of the gospel to restore its purity and beauty. In both the Old and the New Testaments, the marriage relationship is employed to represent the tender and sacred union that exists between Christ and his people. And that's the reason Satan comes so hard at our marriages, because as marriages become broken, it gives a mischaracterization of our relationship with Christ. That our relationship to Christ should be unbroken and should be permanent, as should our marriages. And I'll repeat that again. The marriage relationship is employed to represent the tender and sacred union that exists between Christ and his people, the redeemed ones whom he has purchased at the cost of Calvary. So our salvation came at a very dear cost. And so when we respect our marriages, that's showing that we respect the cost that Christ paid for us. The grace of Christ and this alone can make this institution what God designed it should be, an agent for the blessing and uplifting of humanity, and thus the families of the earth in their unity and peace and love may represent the family of heaven. There's that saying, is this heaven? And if it's in our family, we should be able to say, yes, this is. Now, as in Christ's day, the condition of society presented a sad commentary upon heaven's ideal of this sacred relation. Yet even for those who have found bitterness and disappointment where they had hoped for companionship and joy, I don't know if anybody's experienced that at all, the gospel of Christ offers a solace. The patience and gentleness which his Spirit can impart will sweeten the bitter lot. The heart in which Christ dwells will be so filled, so satisfied with his love, that it will not be consumed with longing to attract sympathy and attention to itself. And through the surrender of the soul to God, his wisdom can accomplish what human wisdom fails to do. Through the revelation of his grace, hearts that were once indifferent or estranged may be united in bonds that are firmer and more enduring than those of earth, the golden bonds of a love that will bear the test of trial. So often we look to the other person to change in a relationship. You know, if only they would do this, then everything would be okay. And the thing is that it's really with us, that we are the ones that need to change. And as we do that and we surrender our life to God, then he can heal those relationships. Like what you were talking about, Roger. There can be healing in that family as they surrender to Christ. Now there's other types of divorce that we could go into, and basically divorce just means separation. There are people who divorce their church or divorce their faith, and that is not a good thing. I firmly believe that when God brings somebody to a church, and it's God bringing them to the church, and they're not just coming because they like the building or they like the music or whatever, but God is laying on their heart they need to be a part of that fellowship, he's doing so because there's a purpose behind them being there, that they can grow spiritually and be able to grow in love for Christ. But sometimes people are there for the wrong reasons, and if it isn't to their satisfaction, then they divorce their relationship with that church. I've always felt if God led me somewhere, I need to stay until he moved me on. Now, some people become lifers. He'll bring people into a church, and they're there the rest of their life. And that's one way God works in people's lives. In my case, it was moving me from church to church because there was things he wanted to teach me and ministry that I needed to do. And so I would stay there even though I didn't want to, because God said to be there. And then when he said it was okay to go, then I was going on to the next thing. And that was fulfilling his plan for my life. So I think we need to be careful about that, if I wear the wrong tie or don't sing on key or something, that you guys won't get discouraged and leave. You will grant me grace. The other thing is other relationships. Now, there are times when we do need to divorce ourselves from some relationships, especially when you're a new Christian and there are friends of yours who don't appreciate the change in your life, and they are going to try to drag you back to what you used to be. And you need to divorce yourself from that situation until you're strong enough to be able to stand. And a lot of people say, well, I'm going to still be friends with them, I can be able to influence them or whatever. And generally it doesn't work that way. Until you're strong in the faith, it's better to be in your nurturing church family so that they can build you up to that point. And I think I've said it before, and I've just seen it happen so many times, where there'll be a single person getting on fire for God, which is a gift of singleness, because you have the freedom to be able to do that. And the minute you make that commitment, God brings somebody into your life, and usually that person is not a good Christian. And they get sidetracked, and all of a sudden they turn cold. So there are certain situations that we do need to divorce ourselves from, and we just need good wisdom to understand those situations. Next thing we want to go to is oaths. We talked about our wedding vows as being the most important vow that we can make. Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37. Again, you have heard that it has been said by them of old, you shall not forswear yourself, but shall perform unto the Lord your oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. That's up to your kids to do. But let your communication be yes, yes, and no, no, for whatever is more of these comes of evil. So basically what he's saying is, what they would do in the old days is they would be in a deal and they would say, well, this is really a good deal, and I swear by the temple that this is exactly as I've said it is. Or the weights that they use might have been altered a little bit. Well, I swear by the throne of God that these are accurate weights. And they weren't. And that was how people were abusing the name of God. I remember when we were kids, we used to say, crisscross my heart and hope to die. It's true. Meanwhile, we had our hands behind our back with our fingers crossed. So we need to be keepers of our promises, because promises are an oath. And I know as a parent, I did not always do that. They would ask, well, Daddy, can we go to the zoo? Well, we'll go next week sometime. And then next week comes around and we don't go. And so what is that teaching our kids?
You don't mean it.
You don't mean it, yeah.
The word's not.
And if we don't mean it, does God mean it? That sort of thing. So I really appreciated the Promise Keeper movement when it came out, because it was teaching particularly men, we need to honor our promises and commitments that we make. and not just find excuses not to. So we need to be people of our word. And if we're not planning on keeping it, then we shouldn't give it. So that's important. It's closely also tied to the third commandment about not taking the Lord's name in vain. And so we want to be careful that we're not using the things of God in a vain or profane manner, that our word should stand for what it means. Ellen White makes this commentary. The reason for this command is given: all things come of God. We have nothing that we have not received more than this. We have nothing that has not been purchased for us by the blood of Christ. Everything we possess comes to us stamped with the cross, bought with the blood that is precious above all estimates, because it is the life of God. Hence, there is nothing that we have a right to pledge, as if it were our own, for the fulfillment of our word. It all belongs to God. The Jews understood the third commandment as prohibiting the profane use of the name of God, but they thought themselves at liberty to employ other oaths. Oath-taking was common among them. Through Moses, they had been forbidden to swear falsely, but they had many devices for freeing themselves from the obligation imposed by an oath. They did not fear to indulge in what was really profanity, nor did they shrink from perjury so long as it was veiled by some technical evasion of the law. That's really not obeying the spirit of the law, when you can use technicalities. Jesus proceeded to lay down a principle that would make oath-taking needlessly. He teaches the exact truth should be the law of speech. Let your speech be yea, yea, and nay, nay. Whatsoever is more than this is of the evil one. These words condemn all those meaningless phrases and expletives that border on profanity. They condemn the deceptive compliments, the evasion of truth, the flattering phrases, the exaggerations, the misrepresentations in trade that are current in society and in the business world. They teach that no one who tries to appear what he is not, or whose words do not convey the real sentiment of his heart, can be called truthful. I don't know if that counts as fishing tales also, but I think that's in that category. Everything that Christians do should be as transparent as sunlight. The truth of God, deception in every one of its myriad forms, is of Satan. Whoever in any way departs from the straight line of truth is betraying himself into the power of the wicked one. Yet it is not a light or an easy thing to speak of the exact truth. We cannot speak the truth unless we know the truth. And how often preconceived opinions, mental biases, imperfect knowledge, and errors of judgment prevent a right understanding of matters with which we have to do. We cannot speak the truth unless our minds are completely guided by Him who is truth. We're next going to go to the issue of retaliation. That is a part of our human nature, that when we get hurt, we want to retaliate back. Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. You have heard that it has been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that you resist not evil, but whoever shall smite you on your right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will see you at the law and take away your coat, let him have your cloak also. And whosoever shall compel you to go a mile, go with him too. Give to him that ask of you, and from him that would borrow of you, turn not away. So what he's saying, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, is that the punishment should fit the crime. So if somebody commits a petty crime, you're not going to give them a death sentence. That would not be appropriate. And so Leviticus is full of examples of restitution, which is a proper punishment for the crime, so to speak. And so we don't want to let people get away with things without, being held to account for it, but we don't want to overly punish them either if it doesn't call for that. Also like the part where it's talking about if they ask you to go a mile, go 2. What that is people may ask you to do things, particularly when you're in the workplace, and you may resent having to do that. But what he's calling us to do is to have an attitude of, well, you want me to do this, I'm going to do this and more, to show that you're not affecting me, I'm doing it willingly. And that's the heart of Christ. So if Emily asks me to do the dishes, I'll actually do the dishes and then I'll wipe them too. Actually, maybe even put them away. So, as a sign of my love. If we retaliate when we get insulted, then what happens? Does it solve anything?
Keeps the dysfunction going.
Yeah, it just escalates. It just keeps getting worse and worse. I think of the old thing of the feud between the Hatfields and the McCoys, where for generations they were taking it out on each other, and it got to the point they didn't even remember what it was all about. But somebody would do this, then they would have to do that. Back and forth it went. We're called to be peacemakers. And that's how we act in a peaceful manner, is by enduring insult. And did Christ endure insults? Yeah, he's a good example to follow. I know back in the day they used to, if they want to provoke you into a duel, they'd come up to you and slap you across the face with their glove, and then you were supposed to say, all right, is it going to be swords or pistols at 30 paces? It didn't accomplish anything. Yeah. Or they would challenge somebody's manhood or whatever, and then you go and you die. I mean, has that proved anything? So what we want to do is be able to take hurts that are designed at us, whether they're real or perceived, and show grace and mercy to other people. And that's how we can be peacekeepers. Ellen had this to say about retaliation. Occasions of irritation to the Jews were constantly arising from their contact with the Roman soldiery. Detachments of troops were stationed at different points throughout Judea and Galilee. And I remember this because we're going to deal with this in the next one as well. But she paints a pretty big picture of this. And their presence reminded the people of their own degradation as a nation. With bitterness of soul, they heard the loud blast of the trumpet and saw the troops forming around the standard of Rome, bowing in homage to this symbol of her power. Collisions between the people and the soldiers were frequent, and these inflamed the popular hatred. Often, as some Roman official with his guard of soldiers hastened from point A to point B, he would seize upon the Jewish peasants who were laboring in the field and compel them to carry burdens up the mountainside or render any other service that might be needed. This was in accordance with the Roman law and custom, and resistance to such demands only called forth taunts and cruelty. Every day deepened in the hearts of people the longing to cast off the Roman yoke. Especially among the bold, rough-handed Galileans, the spirit of insurrection was rife. Capernaum, being a border town, was the seat of a Roman garrison, and even while Jesus was teaching, the sight of a company of soldiers recalled to his hearers the bitter thought of Israel's humiliation. The people looked eagerly to Christ, hoping that he was the one who was to humble the pride of Rome. And I think we've discussed that many, many times, that was their motivation for Jesus becoming the king. With sadness, Jesus looked into the upturned faces before him. He notes the spirit of revenge that stamped its evil imprint upon them, and knows how bitterly the people long for the power to crush their oppressors. Mournfully he bids them, resist not him that is evil, but whosoever smiteth thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Jesus bade his disciples, instead of resisting the demands of those in authority, to do even more than was required of them. And so far as possible, they should discharge every obligation, even if it was beyond what the law of the land required. This is important when we come to understanding the next message that he gives. And this is can be a bitter pill for us to swallow. Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 47. You have heard that it has been said, You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Was that what they were doing? Yeah. But I say to you, love your enemies and bless them that curse you, and do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he makes his sun to shine on the evil and the good, and rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love them which love you, what reward have you? Do not even the publicans the same? And if you greet your brothers only, then what do you have more than others? Do not even the publicans do so? Have we ever been in that situation where somebody's being rough on us and we get resentment in our heart? Has that really helped us? No. And so what Jesus was trying to tell them is, instead of fighting them and resisting them, because it wasn't God's will that they be redeemed at that time, love your neighbor so that he will not retaliate on you. But they didn't listen to him, and various groups of zealots would come and attack the Romans, and they didn't like that very well. And so in 70 AD, they came and destroyed Jerusalem and destroyed the temple and dispersed them from the land. So what Jesus was trying to do was to teach them a lesson that they could preserve what they had if in their hearts they would be right and have love for the enemy. So who's our real enemy? Can be ourselves sometimes, yeah. But there's another being that's Satan, yeah. Satan and his angels. That's our real enemy. Paul says we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but of spiritual powers in high places. So people are not our enemies. And there's a simple question that if we don't minister to our enemies, who is going to? Do we just let them go to a Christless eternity and not try to do anything about it? And I think Jesus is instructing us that we need to do something. And what do? We show kindness to them. We deflect their insults and things from us. We don't let it get under our skin. We show kindness. We smile at them. We're civil. And in so doing, these acts of kindnesses are heaping coals of shame upon their heads. And eventually, it may crack through and their hearts will be changed. But if we act bitterly toward them, is that going to change their heart to the Lord? No. There's going to be no chance of that. So this is why it's important. And I know for the Jews it was very hard because they were under a very severe situation. But they didn't listen to Jesus, and they had some very negative consequences as a result of that. And we can experience that too if we don't take the admonition of Jesus seriously. Love our enemies. That is not easy to do. Does it mean we have to have warm fuzzies toward them? No.
It does come though, after you,
It can.
God gives you,
Yeah.
got a feeling for them.
I think what God's been showing me more and more is the preciousness of every single person. As God looks at them and sees them. We have a lot of preference issues in our hearts for people, and we like some people, we don't like some people. But I think when we get beyond that and we start having the eyes of God, we can see the preciousness of every person. And that's why God does not desire that anyone would perish, but that all would come to everlasting life. And he's given us that opportunity to be part of that ministry. Ellen White said, "Such is the spirit of the law which the rabbis had misinterpreted as a cold and rigid code of extracts. They regarded themselves as better than other men and entitled to the special favor of God by virtue of their birth as Israelites. But Jesus pointed to the spirit of forgiving love as that which would give evidence that they were actuated by any higher motives than even the publicans and sinners whom they despised. He pointed his hearers to the ruler of the universe under the new name, Our Father. He would have them understand how tenderly the heart of God yearned over them. He teaches that God cares for every lost soul. That like as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear him. Such a concept of God was never given to the world by any religion but that of the Bible. Heathenism teaches men to look upon the Supreme Being as an object of fear rather than love. A malign deity to be appeased by sacrifices rather than a father pouring out upon his children the gift of his love. Even the people of Israel had become so blinded to the precious teachings of the prophets concerning God that his revelation of his paternal love was his original subject, a new gift to the world. The Jews held that God loved those who served him, according to their view, those who fulfilled the requirements of the rabbis, and all the rest of the world lay under his frown and curse. That's not a helpful attitude. Not so, says Jesus. The whole world, the evil and the good, lies under the sunshine of his love. The truth you should have learned from nature itself. For God maketh his sun to shine on the evil and the good, and sendeth rain on the just and the unjust. So why is Jesus teaching us these things? He gets to the point in the next verse, chapter 5, verse 48. Be ye therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. So does that mean we can never make a mistake? Is that the kind of perfection he's seeking? Does that mean we have to follow a preset rules of do's and don'ts so that we can be perfect in our outward behavior? Does it mean that? It means our hearts need to be perfected. We need to be perfect in our hearts. Our willingness to love those who don't love us. All these things that he's talking about was trying to take away the negative teachings of the rabbis that promoted that love and that hate in these people that wasn't getting the people anywhere productive. But he's instructing us as his saints that we must be perfect in our hearts and have that love perfected. And how do we perfect that love? Loving the unlovable. I know, Heather, you might experience it in the people you work with. I enjoy hearing from Jackie and Brenda when they're sharing about their experiences in the nursing homes, where they're getting bitten and spit on and different things like that. Their hearts get perfected in showing love in those situations. When the boss is being mean to us on the job, and yet we can smile and show care for him and his family, that's how our hearts are being perfected. There are people in this world that we may not want to associate with, but we do it anyway out of the love of God, and that's what perfects our hearts. It's easy to be with people who are like us, who love us, who care about us, but we're called to go to the unlovable. We're called to go to those who are not like us. A big discussion that's going now among the pastors is the social justice issue. And we're holding a lot of discussions on that. And basically what it boils down to, it's not a political movement that's going to solve anything. It's people on a one-to-one basis saying, I'm going to love you. I don't care what your skin is. I don't care what your ethnicity is. I don't care what your previous behavior was. I'm going to choose to love you and show the love of Christ to you. And that's how our hearts get perfected. I close with these comments from Ellen White. God's ideal for his children is higher than the highest human thought can reach. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. This command is a promise. The plan of redemption contemplates our complete recovery from the power of Satan. I really appreciate what she said there, because when we were under the influence of Satan, we certainly didn't have the love of God in our hearts. But God is perfecting that love and overcoming the power of Satan in our lives. Christ always separates the contrite soul from sin. He came to destroy the works of the devil, and he has made provision that the Holy Spirit shall be imparted to every repentant soul to keep him from sinning. The ideal of Christian character is Christ's likeness. As the Son of Man was perfected in his life, so his followers are to be perfected in their life. Jesus was in all things made like unto his brethren. He became flesh, even as we are. He was hungry and thirsty and weary. He was sustained by food and refreshed by sleep. He shared the lot of men, yet he was the blameless Son of God. He was God in the flesh, and his character is to be ours. The Lord says of those who believe in him, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. It's not enough just to say, I accept you as my Savior. It's not enough just to read the Bible. It's not enough just to study the words that it shares. We have to be Christ-like in our life. In our hearts, we have to be redeemed. And from our hearts, our outward behavior will be motivated, and people will see the light and the love of Christ in our lives. That's what he's calling us to. To do that, we need to be obedient. We need to follow his instructions. So we're going to close with this song, Trust and Obey. And that's number 590.